So what I want to do today is just show a couple of camera tricks to get your kind of mind working in different ways. Just relatively simple camera animations that can give you some cool effects. That'll take us a little bit further than what we did with the building assignment. So first thing I want to show is the Dolly Zoom. And let me get my outliner out of the way. And we'll just focus on the correct camera, camera 1. So a Dolly Zoom is also called a Hitchcock zoom. If you've ever seen Vertigo, it's used quite a bit there. It's also in Jaws, if you've ever seen Jaws, which I'm guessing you have. It also pops up a bunch of other places. What a Dolly Zoom is, or Hitchcock zoom is, well, let me show you, and then I'll tell you how it works. So here we go. Also, I need to go to frame 300. There we go. So this is a Dolly Zoom. And it can actually work in forward or reverse. If you play it forward, you can see the background kind of falls away. And then if you play it in reverse, it compresses. So the way that this works is it's a combination, well, as the term Dolly Zoom suggests, it's a combination of dollying one way and zooming the other way. So you actually maintain the same framing. If you notice this outside arch right here, okay, right on the edges, that framing stays the same. We're seeing the same kind of edges, but because the zoom, the focal length changes, it's compressing or expanding the background. So let me, yeah, we're playing forward here. So I'm going to jump out to, whoops, come on. Okay, here's the side view of what's happening. Here's the camera that's doing this. So the camera starts here and moves in. Okay? But at the same time, it's zooming. So if let me grab the graph editor here. And here's the camera. So we have the camera translation, which is actually moving in the z-axis, and we have the focal length. So it's moving, and then it's also zooming from, I think it's going from 135 to 24, or something like that. Yeah, 135 down to 24 to maintain that focal length. So what I can do is I'll set this up just with a new camera. So I'll delete that camera. And what we need to do is go to Create and Camera, just a regular camera. We don't need an aim. We don't need an up. I'm going to, in this view, choose camera 4, which is my newest camera. And what I need to do first is kind of figure out where my bounds of my camera are. So I'm going to go to my attribute editor. I'm going to go down to my display options. I'm going to turn on display film gate. I'm going to set my overscan to 2 for now. I also need to adjust my aspect ratio, so I'll scroll back up. And here where it says film gate, I'm going to set that to TV, or not TV, sorry, 1.85 projection. Okay, that's 16 by 9. It's kind of your standard widescreen. And then if I go back down to the film gate, I'm just going to darken the gate mask color and increase the opacity so it's a little easier to see what is and is not in frame. Okay. So I have that. Now I need to set my starting frame. And I'm going to start with it with a wide angle. So I'm going to set my focal length on the camera to 24 is what I used before. Just a nice wide angle there. And we'll start, I'll actually leave a little bit on the edges here. Okay, but that's going to be my frame. I want to keep that framing throughout the whole move. So once I have that and I'm happy with my position, I'll maybe move it up a little bit more. Okay, just a slightly different look than what we had before. So once I'm happy with that, I'm going to right click on my focal length and set the key. So I've got a keyframe set. Whoops. Before I do that, let me go to frame 1. Then I'll set my key. And in my channel box layer editor, I need to set a keyframe for my position. I really only need the Z position, but I'll just hit Shift W because it's faster. Okay, so you can see I have keyframes for translate and keyframes for focal length. Now I'm going to move to the end frame, and if we make this a 3-second move, that'll be 72 frames at 24 frames a second. So I'll go to frame 72, and I know I want my ending focal length to be 135. So I've got auto keyframing turned on, so you can see that keyframe automatically updates. But now I'm zoomed in way past my starting frame. So now I need to adjust my translate Z. I need to move it backwards so that I can see everything. Okay, so move it back to about there, which is about the same amount of margin on both sides. And let's scrub through. Okay, it looks like my starting position was wrong because I didn't set it at the first frame. So let me set that at the correct arch. There we go. Okay, so that's the first one. And then the last one is pretty good. And so now we can hit play. And there we go. Okay, so it's just animating 2 attributes, just position and then focal length going in opposite directions to maintain that frame, and it gives a really dramatic kind of feeling, whether that's kind of compressing the background or expanding it. If I play it in reverse, there's your vertigo. There's everything falling away and really focusing on the thing in front. So that's the Dolly Zoom. That's the first thing that I want to show, and we'll move on to the next thing. So the next thing, I'm going to hide my Dolly Zoom, and I'm going to turn on my camera path layer. Oh, we can also hide this camera because I don't need it anymore. Oops, I added it to the wrong thing. There we go. All right. So next, if I go to camera 2 here, perspective, camera 2. Now I have a camera, and it is animated along a path, which is pretty neat. Don't worry about this line that's swinging around. Oh, I also need to change my end frame to 300 because there's a lot more animation here. So it's going to go through this whole thing. Okay. So the way that this works is you create your camera the same that you normally would, and then you create a curve that is going to be your motion path, and you apply a motion path to it, and then you've got some options. So I'll do that. I'm not going to delete the camera, I'll just delete the motion path, because to add the camera it's the same as I just did, right? Same settings. Generally I'm set to 24mm focal length. Yeah, and same sort of settings. The only other thing I'm going to change is my film gate. I just need to set that overscan back to 2 just because I've got a smaller window here. So I've got that. What I need to do, I actually have hidden on a layer, I think. There it is. So I made the arch path with a curve, with it using Mesh, which I can show you a preview of later. But just because I already have that curve made, I'm just going to duplicate it. Okay, but you can do the same thing if you just go to your curves surfaces shelf and just use the EP curve tool. It works the same way. Actually, you know what? I'll do it that way just to demonstrate it. Okay, so I'm going to go to my we'll go to a top-down view, and let me turn off or just hide the things I don't need. Oops. I can hide that. I can hide that. Okay. So I got my EP curve tool right here, and I'm going to add a point here at the beginning. I'm going to hold down Shift and add a point down here to keep it straight, and then I'll add another kind of straight point there, and just trace my path. Okay. Hit Q to go into object mode, You see I've got a little kind of right angle here that I don't want. So with the EP Curve tool, I can right-click on the curve, go to Edit Point. I can select that point, and we can kind of adjust this until it doesn't look terrible. Okay, that looks better. Good enough. I'll go back to Perspective View, back to Object Mode, move my curve up. Okay, you can see, again, we've got some misbehaving curve points, so let's just move that down. There we go. All right, so now the actual important part with animating a camera along a path, or really anything along a path. We're going to select the curve in object mode, hold down Shift, select the camera, and then we're going to go, I'm in the animation menu set. Okay, by default you're probably in modeling. I'm in the animation menu set and go to Constrain, Motion Paths, and Attach to Motion Path. I'm going to open up the options just to take a look at them. By default, it'll use the time range of the time slider. Okay, so whatever you have this set to down here, that's what it's going to use. And then you can also define what the front axis is and the up axis. You can make these adjustments later, so I'm going to leave them at default just to show you that process. Yeah, and I think we're good for now. So I'm going to click Attach, and the camera's going to jump right up to that path, and the animation is actually already going to be there. In the attribute editor, we now have this motion path tab. I'm going to talk about this in a second. We also have camera path, but let's just take a look at what this what the camera is now seeing. I'm going to hit play, and we have a problem, and that's that the camera is looking sideways. Okay, so we need to fix that. If I zoom in here on the camera, you can see that yes, it is indeed looking sideways, and that's not what we want. So if you select the camera, you go to the motion path tab in the attribute editor. It's the front axis that you need to adjust. So you can see the blue arrow is the one that's looking in the right direction. That's the Z axis. So I'm going to change that to Z. And now it's looking in the right axis, but it's looking the wrong direction. So we need to inverse front, and now it's looking the other way. You also have similar options with the up axis. If the camera is kind of tilted on its side, you can adjust the up axis to solve that problem. So now the camera's looking the right way. Let's hit play. And we're zooming right on through, following the path, turning the corners nicely, and that's it. The camera has animated along the path. I'll show you a couple more things here about this, a couple of options that you have. First thing is, let's say right now it's animating over 300 frames, and maybe you decide that that's too slow and you want to make a change. You could delete the path and add a new one, but that's kind of a hassle. The other way that you can do it is if you go to your motion path and you select, you can see at the end we've got this point that says 300, right? That's the end frame. Select that point with the left click, and in the attribute editor you want to go to the position marker shape node, right? This shape tab, and you can see time. You set that to what you want your end frame to be, so let's say 200. Hit return. It doesn't update immediately, but if you click away and click back on it, you can see that it says 200 now. And now we hit play, and it's going to move through it faster, and then when we get to frame 200 down here, it will be done. Okay, so that's how you can adjust the duration. You can also, I'm going to go back and select my camera again. There's one other interesting thing that you can do, and that is, there's the camera. If we scroll down here in the motion path tab again, we have bank as an option. So I click bank, and let's move down into a corner. Okay, so here you can see as it's turning, the camera tilts, right? It goes a little bit Dutch here. So that's what bank is doing, right? Halfway through the turn, you can see how the horizon is no longer level. Okay, if I turn off bank, it goes back to level. You can also adjust the scale. So maybe I bump that up to 3 if I want more of an adjustment, something a little bit more dramatic. You can also set limits if you want. Now I can go back to 0 and We'll play, and now we kind of fly through. It feels more like we're flying through it than just moving through it. So it's a pretty cool effect. It can be tough with really tight corners. You can see sometimes these corners, it feels like you want to look ahead a little bit more. So if you want to kind of turn the camera a little bit, you can adjust the up twist. So if I set that to like 5, that's looking the wrong way. Let's go -5 or -15. You kind of adjust the way that the camera is looking. So you'd have to keyframe that, but the keyframes work the same way any other value works. And you can get that kind of more dynamic motion, which I think is a pretty cool thing there. All right, so the last thing I want to show is part camera, part kind of animation technique, and that is to go into kind of slow motion or bullet time. So think about a Zack Snyder film, right? Where you get that, you're moving faster, then you go really slow, and you get the dramatic move, and then you speed ramp right back out of it. So speed ramping or bullet time, that sort of thing is what we're going for here. So I've set up a pretty simple animation. It's a bouncing ball and a camera flying by. So I'll hit play. Okay, so that's all it is. It's a 36-second animation or something like that, not even. Okay, it's done at 32 frames. And it's the motion that I want, but what I want to do is when it gets close to the ball in the air, I want to slow it down. Okay, I want this to be really slow and dramatic, and then speed up back away from it. So the way that this is going to work is once you have your keyframes set, and I have on my camera, okay, I've got a camera and aim, so I've got the aim target looking at where the ball is. On the camera, I have 4 keyframes. My starting position, in real close, and so frame 13 to 22, this is the part that I want to be really slow. And then my last frame where the camera finishes. So we know that in animation, if you want something to be slower, you need to increase the number of frames between keyframes, right? Increase the amount of time it takes. It makes perfect sense. So that's what I'm going to do, but I also need to slow down the sphere itself because that's animating as well. And so the way that I'm going to do that is I've got my camera here, and here's my dope sheet for it. Let me make sure I have the actual camera selected. Frame everything up. Okay, so here's my keyframes. And I want to expand this out. So this gap right here between 13 and 22, that's what I want to make slower. And then I also want the ball. So I'm going to select in the outliner. Here's the hierarchy that I have for animating the balls. I'm going to select all those groups and the camera. So I'm holding down Command to select multiple. Okay, so now I have all of those keyframes up in my dope sheet. I'm going to go to frame 22. I'm going to select all the keyframes after that, and I'm going to move them away. So I'm going to hit W to bring up my move tool, and whoops, select them all, and then just middle click and drag, and we'll go out to, I don't know, 72 will be the last frame, something like that. So that part's going to stay full speed because I haven't changed the distance between these keyframes. It's just the distance between 13 and 22 that's going to be slower. But if I play it back right now, it's only going to be slow between where, frame 20 and 22. So I need to expand out these keyframes as well. And for that, I'm going to scale them. So I'm going to hit R, brings up this little box around all my keyframes, and I can click and drag, and it's going to proportionally scale everything out. So let's say right about there. Okay, so I've got much more distance between them, which means it's going to go nice and slow. And my last frame is now frame 72, so I'm going to set that on my time slider. You can see my keyframes here. And so now let's hit play and see what it looks like. Okay, so we've got a couple of issues here. Let's see what is happening. We go really fast, and then we go slow, but the ball is out of shot. Oh, I know what I did wrong. So, when I scaled everything apart, not everything had a keyframe on frame 13 and 22. So it's actually interpolating, like this rotation is going slow this whole time because I just stretched everything out. So what I need to do before I move everything around is I need to make sure I have keyframes set at the beginning and the end of my slow motion. So I'm going to go to frame 13 and I'm going to select my rotation. I'm going to hit Shift E to set keyframes there, scale, Shift R to set keyframes there, and transform, Shift W to set keyframes there. Same thing with frame 22. Shift W for transform, Shift R for scale, and Shift E for rotate. Now I have all my keyframes set. Now this will work nice and smooth. So again, I can select everything in the outliner. That. We'll go to frame 22. Select all these keyframes. We'll move them down to frame 72. And then all these middle keyframes, we need to scale them apart. So and I will drag them out to about there. And now let's hit play. You'll see the ball is in frame, that's a great sign. We'll hit play. We'll deselect the sphere. There we go. That looks a lot better. Okay, so we just have to make sure we set those keyframes at the beginning and the end of the of that period we want to be slow-mo. The period we want to scale out, we need to make sure those keyframes are there. So now it looks pretty good, but it looks even better when you actually give it some background and some scenes so you can tell that you're rotating around it. So if I just jump over to this version, I've added some things in the background. We can jump to camera 3. Actually, I think I already have that open in... No, I don't. Okay. Perspective camera 3. I've also added some depth of field here. Now, I just used the regular depth of field because it plays back in the viewport. I would do the Arnold depth of field if I was rendering this, but just for viewport playback, I use the regular depth of field. So I'll hit play here, and now you see in this version I don't have the slow motion going quite as slow or quite as long, but you can see with some depth of field and with some background animation so you can tell that things are rotating, it's a pretty cool, pretty dynamic shot. So those are three little kind of camera tricks that you can use to add some interest, add a lot of kind of value to your animations with really not a ton of effort there. They're pretty quick things to do, and I think they look pretty great for how short a time that you can do them in.